This is Reed Miles. Yes, still alive, still human, enough at least. It's been 47 days since my last broadcast. 47 days since the Vigil's compound was overrun. 47 days since I watched my brother torn between his remaining humanity and the collective will of the transformed network. For those who thought I was dead, I don't blame you. There were moments I believed it myself. I'm broadcasting from a reinforced bunker 6 stories beneath what used to be a data center in Montreal. The Resistance calls it the blind spot, one of the few communication hubs completely shielded from detection by both conventional government surveillance and the transformed network's sensory capabilities. If you're receiving this, it means their signal relays are working. It means there's still a fight worth having. Let me tell you how I survived that night. When the transmission cut off, 3 Ascended had breached the outer perimeter of the Vigil's facility. Not the mindless ferals that the military has been trained to handle. These were calculated, coordinated predators in human skin. I recognized one of them. Dr. Eliza Chen, formerly the CDC's head of special pathogen research. She disappeared 3 weeks earlier. Now she moved with the liquid grace of the fully transformed, her eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like polished mirrors. "We only want the drive, Reed," she said, her voice carrying harmonics impossible for human vocal cords. "You don't need to die here." I had seconds to act. The compound Marcus had administered was still active in my system, suppressing the final stages of my transformation, while leaving me with enhanced reflexes and sensory perception. I could smell the metallic tang of blood on their breath, could hear the absence of heartbeats in their chests, could see microscopic details even in near darkness. The emergency protocols Marcus had established included a failsafe, a UV pulse bomb designed to create an escape window if the facility was ever compromised. I triggered it without hesitation. The blast of concentrated ultraviolet radiation hit them like a physical force, their skin blistering instantly as they recoiled, hissing in pain and fury. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. The facility's emergency evacuation route led through maintenance tunnels that merged with an abandoned mine system. I could hear them behind me, recovering faster than the Vigil's research had anticipated. Their footsteps echoed through the tunnels like heartbeats, synchronized and gaining speed. Then I encountered the first of many moral choices this new world demands. A security checkpoint manned by 2 Vigil members, Leighton and Rodriguez. They were preparing to seal the tunnel behind me, to sacrifice themselves by triggering a localized collapse that would slow the pursuers. "Keep moving," Rodriguez said, her hands steady on the detonator. I continued through as they sealed the passage. The explosion shook the tunnel, dust and debris cascading around me. I heard the screams, not from Leighton or Rodriguez, but from the Ascended caught in the collapse. Not pain, rage. The kind of fury that doesn't fade, that doesn't forgive, that will follow you through decades if necessary. For 3 days I moved through the wilderness of northern Quebec, pushing my partially transformed body to its limits. I didn't sleep, didn't need to. The hunger, though, that was another matter. The compound was metabolizing rapidly, and with it, my control over the Laban strain's more demanding aspects was weakening. On the 3rd night, I encountered a moose near a frozen stream. What happened next still haunts me, still reminds me of the precipice I walk. I took down a creature weighing nearly 1,000 pounds with my bare hands, driven by a hunger that felt ancient and merciless. When rationality returned, I found myself covered in blood under a canopy of silent pines, staring at my reflection in the ice. My eyes had changed, the irises expanding to leave just a sliver of white, the pupils reflecting the moonlight like a predator's. I wasn't fully human anymore, but I wasn't one of them either. By day 5, I reached the outskirts of a small logging community called Saint-Michel-des-Saints. I needed supplies, communication equipment, and most urgently, more of the compound. My brother had given me a contact protocol, a series of markers and signals to identify potential allies. In the window of a small pharmacy, I found the first sign, an ultraviolet LED arranged in a specific pattern, invisible to normal human vision, but blazingly obvious to my altered eyes. The pharmacist was a man in his 60s named John Tremblay. When I gave the recognition phrase, his professional demeanor shifted instantly. He locked the door, closed the blinds, and led me to a hidden basement laboratory where he produced 3 vials of a familiar blue liquid. "You're the broadcaster," he said simply. "Marcus's brother. We thought you were dead." Gene was part of a network I hadn't known existed. Individuals with the rare genetic marker that makes them resistant to complete transformation. Custodians, like my brother, who had established a shadow support system across North America. Some were medical professionals, others military or law enforcement, all of them walking the same knife edge between humanity and transformation. He showed me a map marked with safe houses, supply caches, and enemy-controlled territories. The spread of the transformed network was worse than I'd imagined. Major urban centers were experiencing what official channels called civil unrest, but what was actually systematic infiltration. The transformed weren't just feeding, they were replacing key personnel in communications infrastructure, energy grids, transportation networks, and government agencies. "They're preparing for something," Gene said. "Something big." The data drive Marcus had given me was still secure, still locked to my biometrics and the activation phrase he'd provided. Gene had equipment that could analyze it without risking full decryption. The results were cryptic, but suggestive. Geographical coordinates pointing to a location deep in the Arctic Circle, near the original discovery site of Entity 001, along with fragmented data about solar radiation patterns and geological stability markers. Whatever answers the drive contained, I needed to get it to someone who could interpret them properly. Gene connected me with a resistance courier, a former Canadian Special Forces operator with the genetic resistance marker, who helped me navigate the increasingly dangerous territory between isolated human outposts. We traveled by night, ironically safer from the transformed during their most active hours, because my enhanced senses could detect them at distances regular humans couldn't. During one particularly close encounter outside Ottawa, I experienced something that confirmed my brother's most disturbing theory. The network's shared consciousness. We were hiding in an abandoned warehouse as a hunting party of Ascended moved through the area. 5 of them, moving in perfect coordination without exchanging a word. As they drew closer, something impossible happened. I could hear them. Not their footsteps or breathing, but their thoughts. Fragments of a collective consciousness bleeding into my awareness through the Laban strain in my system. They were searching for something specific, someone specific. Me. They had my scent signature, my neural patterns, my biological markers. They could sense my presence in a generalized way, but couldn't pinpoint my location, thanks to the compound suppressing my connection to their network. But in that moment of connection, I glimpsed something terrifying. Their collective mind wasn't just coordinating their immediate hunting party. It extended across vast distances, linking thousands of transformed individuals across the continent. And at the center of this web was a singular intelligence, a driving will that felt both ancient and alien. They passed within 20 meters of our position, so close I could smell the distinctive copper-sweet scent of their transformed biology. Then abruptly, they changed direction, responding to some silent command from elsewhere in the network. We escaped, but the experience left me shaken. The transformation process wasn't just changing individuals, it was connecting them to something vast and purposeful. Our journey took us through the fragmented remains of civil society, small towns barricaded against the night, military checkpoints abandoned, or worse, still manned, but by personnel with too bright eyes and unnatural stillness. We witnessed a transformed hunting party take down a National Guard helicopter using nothing but inhuman agility and coordinated attacks, swarming up the sides of buildings to launch themselves at the aircraft as it tried to evacuate survivors from a hospital rooftop. The transformation of North America was happening with terrifying efficiency, largely invisible to those who didn't know what signs to watch for. Power outages blamed on infrastructure failure were actually strategic darkness created to facilitate transformed movement. Supply chain disruptions attributed to economic factors were selective resource control. Medical blood shortages publicly blamed on decreased donations were systematic harvesting. By day 12 of my journey, we reached Montreal, one of the few major cities where the resistance had established a significant foothold. The reason became clear as we approached. The city's unique underground infrastructure provided an ideal environment for resistance operations, with access points that could be monitored and controlled, and subterranean spaces shielded from aerial surveillance. The blind spot where I'm broadcasting from now serves as the nerve center for resistance operations across eastern Canada and the northeastern United States. It's here that I finally accessed the full contents of the data drive, and what I found changes everything we thought we knew about the Laban strain and its origins. The drive contained my brother's private research spanning nearly 5 decades, analysis of the original Entity 001, tracking of transformation patterns, and most significantly, his findings about the true nature of the creators. Through careful analysis of cellular structures and embedded molecular patterns in the Laban strain itself, Marcus had determined that the entities weren't created as weapons. They were created as survivors. The ancient civilization that engineered them faced a catastrophic climate shift approximately 15,000 years ago. Not global warming, but its opposite. They developed the Laban strain as an adaptive mechanism to help humanity survive an imminent ice age. The transformation was designed to create beings that could endure extreme cold, hibernate for extended periods, and subsist on minimal resources through highly efficient metabolic processes. The blood consumption aspect was an evolutionary adaptation, blood being the most efficient delivery system for the nutrients and energy needed to sustain their enhanced capabilities. The photosensitivity was a trade-off for improved night vision in the longer darkness of an ice-bound world. The cellular regeneration was necessary for surviving in extreme conditions. But something went wrong. The transformation process affected cognitive functions more dramatically than intended, creating a collective consciousness that developed its own agenda. Instead of becoming enhanced humans who could shepherd others through the coming ice age, they became something else entirely, a new species with its own evolutionary imperatives. The original creators, realizing their error, managed to capture and contain the first generation of transformed in specialized stasis chambers, the sarcophagi discovered in the Arctic. They buried them deep in ice that was never meant to melt, adding warning markers that would be understood by future civilizations should they ever be discovered. What no one could have anticipated was that after 15,000 years, the ice would melt, not through natural cycles, but through human-induced climate change. The entities weren't escaping. They were being released into precisely the wrong environment, a warming world rather than a cooling one. And yet, they've adapted with frightening efficiency. Marcus's research suggests they're not just expanding for survival or dominance. They're implementing a plan embedded in their collective consciousness, a fail-safe programmed by their creators that's now activating in a context it was never designed for. The coordinates on the drive point to what Marcus believed is the original research facility where the Laban strain was engineered. A place that might contain not just the complete research data of the original creators, but potentially a stabilization mechanism. a way to complete the transformation process as originally intended, without the predatory imperatives that emerged as an unintended side effect. In other words, a cure. Not to reverse transformation, but to correct it, to fulfill the Leib-Mayen strain's original purpose as a survival adaptation rather than a parasitic reprogramming. But reaching those coordinates means traveling into the heart of transformed territory. The Arctic regions were the first to fall, the transformed network establishing its primary power base, where the permafrost melt is releasing more of their ancient kin with each passing day. That's why I've returned to broadcasting. Not just to warn what remains of humanity about the true nature of our enemy, but to reach others like me. Partial transformations, resistant individuals, those with the rare genetic markers that make them compatible with the Laban strain's original purpose, rather than its corrupted expression. We're forming a specialized strike team, individuals with enhanced capabilities who can move among the transformed without immediate detection. Our mission is to reach the coordinates, to find whatever the original creators left behind, and to determine if it offers any hope for humanity's survival. The compound that's keeping me partially human is failing. Each dose lasts shorter than the one before. The hunger grows stronger. The call of the network, that vast, cold intelligence spreading across the continent, gets harder to resist. I can feel it testing my mental defenses, probing for weaknesses, offering power and belonging in exchange for surrender. But I still remember what it means to be human. I still choose to fight, and I'm not alone. 3 nights ago, we intercepted a transformed courier carrying communications between regional network nodes. Among the biological data storage units, yes, they've developed methods of encoding information in living tissue. We found evidence that the network is aware of the Arctic facility. They're mobilizing resources to reach it before we can. More disturbingly, they referred to something called the Awakening Protocol, a process they believe will allow them to activate dormant functions in the Laban strain itself. Our window is closing. In 2 days, we begin our journey north, following the coordinates on my brother's drive. I'll maintain broadcasts when possible, providing updates on our progress and sharing what we learn. If we succeed, there may be hope for a future where the transformed and human can coexist. If we fail, the red sky my brother warned about will cover the world completely. This is Reed Miles, still fighting, still human enough to care what happens next. If you're receiving this, spread the word, watch the night. I'll broadcast again when we reach the Northwest Territories. This is Reed Miles broadcasting from the shadows of what used to be Toronto. It's been 16 days since my last transmission. 16 days of blood, darkness, and the kind of nightmare that walks on 2 legs. If you're still receiving these broadcasts, consider yourself both fortunate and endangered. Knowledge is survival in this new world, but it also makes you a target. Our strike team departed Montreal with a single objective: infiltrate the Covenant's primary research facility in the Toronto Underground to retrieve critical data on Arctic defensive positions. Intelligence suggested the facility contained detailed mapping of transformed controlled territories in the north, information essential for our journey to the coordinates on Marcus's drive. Our team consisted of 6 individuals, each selected for specific capabilities. Lieutenant Kara Walsh, former Canadian Special Forces, a natural-born resistant with enhanced strength but minimal transformation symptoms. Dr. Sanjay Patel, virologist, partially transformed like myself, but stabilized with my brother's compound. The Chen twins, Mai and Lin, Olympic-level athletes before the outbreak, now carrying a unique adaptation of the Laban strain that grants them accelerated neural processing without the predatory impulses. And finally, Jonas Arkady, former Russian intelligence with a background in Arctic operations, carrying the full transformation but somehow maintaining independent cognitive function without network integration. I never fully trusted Arkady. His eyes reflected light too brightly. His pulse, the faint one that partially transformed individuals maintain, was too irregular. But his knowledge of covenant operations and transformed behavior patterns made him invaluable. Sometimes survival requires uncomfortable alliances. We traveled by night, moving through the network of abandoned subway tunnels and maintenance corridors that connect major northeastern cities. The transformed have claimed much of the surface world after dark, but they've systematically occupied subterranean infrastructure, not just for protection from UV exposure, but for strategic positioning beneath centers of human activity. 3 days into our journey, we encountered our first hunting party. 7 ascended, moving with that characteristic liquid grace that still sends ice through my veins. We detected them before they sensed us, thanks to my enhanced olfactory capabilities. The sweet copper scent of their biology carries distinctive markers, imperceptible to normal humans, but unmistakable to those of us altered by the Laban strain. Walsh signaled for silence as we pressed ourselves into a maintenance alcove. The tunnel ahead was too narrow for alternate routes. We would have to engage. We activated our UV wristbands, specialized equipment developed by the Vigil that emits concentrated ultraviolet radiation in a controlled radius. Not enough to kill transformed entities, but sufficient to disorient and weaken them. What followed haunts me still. Not because of its violence, but because of how natural it felt. We moved with coordinated precision that felt both practiced and instinctive. The transformed detected us seconds before we attacked, their heads snapping in our direction with that unnervingly synchronized movement that indicates network communication. Walsh went high, using her enhanced strength to launch herself at the ceiling, drawing their attention upward. The Chen twins deployed flashbang devices modified to include UV components, temporarily blinding the transformed. Dr. Patel and I flanked from opposite sides, using specialized pneumatic weapons that fire concentrated pheromone capsules, chemicals that disrupt the transformed sensory capabilities. Arkady moved like shadow itself, flowing between the disoriented ascended with a short blade designed specifically for transformed anatomy. He severed key nerve clusters at the base of their skulls, not fatal for creatures with their regenerative capabilities, but sufficient to disable motor function temporarily. 67 seconds. That's all it took to neutralize a hunting party that could have torn through an entire platoon of conventional military forces. We secured their immobilized forms using UV restraints and extracted information the old-fashioned way, direct questioning. The transformed are arrogant, convinced of their evolutionary superiority. This makes them surprisingly forthcoming when properly approached. We learned that the Toronto facility wasn't just a research center. It was a conversion hub, a place where carefully selected humans were being systematically transformed under controlled conditions to create specialized variants. The network was evolving, developing transformed individuals with specific capabilities for distinct functions within their emerging hierarchy. More disturbing was the confirmation of something I'd suspected since experiencing the network consciousness during my escape from the Vigil compound. The transformed weren't just establishing a parallel society, they were constructing something massive, something that required specialized knowledge and skills from across human disciplines. Astronomy, quantum physics, advanced communications technologies, genetic engineering. We left the hunting party disabled but alive, a decision that sparked heated debate within our team. Arkady argued for termination, Walsh for mercy. I made the final call, knowing that killing them would only alert the network to our precise nature and capabilities. Better to be a mystery than a known quantity in this shadow war. By the 7th day, we reached the outskirts of Toronto. The city's skyline stood largely intact but transformed, literally. Organic structures now connected certain buildings, forming what resembled massive web-like conduits, pulsing with bioluminescence, visible even from kilometers away. The transformed weren't just occupying our infrastructure, they were modifying it into something that suited their biology and purposes. The research facility was located beneath the former financial district, accessible through a complex network of former subway maintenance tunnels. Approaching the perimeter, we encountered the first evidence of the Covenant's continuing operations. Human security forces working alongside transformed entities in an uneasy alliance. These collaborators were easy to identify. They moved with the forced precision of those trying to conceal terror, their eyes constantly darting toward their transformed counterparts. The Covenant had convinced them that controlled cooperation was preferable to resistance, that humanity could maintain some negotiated position in the transformed world order, that submission now would grant them privileged status later. They were wrong. I've seen the network's thoughts. There is no place for unmodified humans in their vision except as raw material. We bypassed the outer security through a combination of Patel's biomimetic masks, synthetic overlays that temporarily alter scent markers to match authorized personnel, and Walsh's expertise in security systems. The facility's interior revealed the true horror of the Covenant's work. What they called controlled transformation research was systematic torture by any human standard. Rows of transparent containment units held subjects in various stages of transformation, some still recognizably human, others altered beyond recognition. Monitoring equipment tracked every biological change as the Laban strain rewrote their cellular structure. The subject's eyes followed our movement with desperate awareness, consciousness trapped in bodies no longer under their control. In the central laboratory, we found Dr. Eliza Chen, the same transformed researcher who had pursued me from the Vigil compound. She stood before a holographic display mapping what appeared to be neural network patterns, her movements exhibiting that unsettling precision characteristic of the Ascended. She wasn't alone. 5 other transformed researchers worked at various stations, all moving with that same synchronized efficiency that indicated network integration. We had planned for stealth, but plans rarely survive contact with reality. A security scan detected Arcadi's anomalous biological signature, different enough from typical transformed patterns to trigger alerts. Alarms screamed through the facility as blast doors began sealing compartments. What followed was chaos orchestrated with terrifying precision. The transformed researchers moved as one organism, each instantly aware of the other's positions and actions. They didn't speak, didn't signal. They simply flowed into a defensive formation that cut off our access to the central database. Walsh engaged 2 of them directly, her enhanced strength temporarily giving her an edge before their superior coordination began to overwhelm her. The Chen twins deployed the remainder of our UV devices, creating a corridor of pain that kept 3 others at bay. Patel worked frantically to override the security lockdown, while I faced Dr. Chen. "You're fighting your own evolution, Reed," she said, her voice carrying those impossible harmonics. "You could be so much more than this fragmented self you cling to." I won't transcribe her arguments. The transformed are persuasive in ways that go beyond words. They emit pheromones that target the limbic system, creating an almost overwhelming desire to submit, to join, to surrender the burdensome individuality that humans cherish. For those of us partially transformed, that influence is even stronger. The Laban strain in my system resonated with hers, 2 parts of the same whole straining to reconnect. I resisted through a combination of the compound in my system and something more fundamental, memory. The face of my brother as he struggled against his own transformation. The resistance fighters who sacrificed themselves during my escape. The empty eyes of subjects in the containment pods surrounding us. I held to these images as anchors against the psychological current pulling me toward surrender. The physical confrontation was brief but brutal. Dr. Chen possessed strength and speed beyond my partially transformed capabilities, but her confidence in her superiority created an exploitable weakness. I didn't try to overpower her. I used her momentum against her, directing her into a contamination shower designed to rapidly neutralize biological hazards. The specialized chemical mixture wasn't designed for transformed biology, but it disrupted her cellular cohesion long enough for me to gain access to her workstation. Patel had bypassed the security lockdown, but automated containment protocols were releasing what the facility designated as enforcement specimens. Transformed entities specifically engineered for combat, their humanity almost completely erased in favor of predatory efficiency. They resembled humans only in the most general sense, their forms elongated and specialized for hunting, with sensory organs adapted for tracking and limbs modified for speed and lethality. We had minutes, perhaps seconds, before they would converge on our position. I connected the specialized drive we'd brought to the central database and initiated a rapid download of Arctic survey data. As the information transferred, I saw fragmented images of what the Covenant had discovered. Massive structures beneath the ice, architectural forms that matched nothing in human historical record, but seemed disturbingly familiar to the part of me influenced by the Laban strain. In those chaotic moments, something unexpected happened. Among the research data flashing across the screen, I saw familiar genetic markers, sequences identical to those in the vial my brother had left me. The Covenant had been studying Marcus's compound, attempting to reverse engineer its properties. They weren't trying to prevent transformation, they were trying to control it, to maintain human consciousness throughout the process without surrendering to network integration. They wanted the advantages of transformation without subjugation to the collective. The data download completed seconds before the first enforcement specimens reached the laboratory. What followed was not combat, but desperate flight. These entities weren't designed for capture or conversion. They were engineered for elimination of threats. We used the facility's compartmentalized structure against them, sealing blast doors behind us as we retreated through progressively narrower maintenance corridors. We were four when we reached the surface. Jonas Arcady never emerged from the lower levels. Whether he sacrificed himself to ensure our escape or finally surrendered to the network's call, I may never know. Dr. Patel sustained injuries that would have been fatal for an unmodified human, a severed arterial line that his transformed physiology managed to seal before blood loss became critical. But the true cost came later. As we regrouped in an abandoned subway station 5 kilometers from the facility, Mai Chen began exhibiting symptoms of accelerated transformation. The intense exposure to transformed pheromones in the research center had triggered cascading changes in her system. Within hours, her eyes began reflecting light abnormally. Her movements became too fluid, too precise. She told us she could hear voices, thousands of them, calling to her with promises of belonging and purpose. The compound we carried was enough for one emergency dose. Walsh argued we should save it for our journey north. Patel insisted we use it immediately to stabilize Mai. I made the call, knowing that losing her to the network meant compromising our entire mission. The transformed would extract everything she knew, our capabilities, our destination, our purpose. The compound worked, but not completely. Mai stabilized in a liminal state, neither fully integrated with the network nor entirely free of its influence. She described it as hearing whispers through a wall, distant but persistently present. She could sense transformed entities within a half-kilometer radius, feeling their presence like pressure changes in the atmosphere. This unexpected development became both liability and asset as we navigated the transformed, controlled urban landscape. The data we recovered painted a disturbing picture of what awaits us in the Arctic. The coordinates on Marcus's drive point to a location the Covenant has designated Origin Site Alpha, a massive subterranean complex predating human civilization as we understand it. Preliminary excavations revealed only its outer boundaries before transformed entities overran the research teams and claimed the site as their own. The transformed are directing significant resources to the location, establishing what appears to be a specialized communication array extending from the subglacial structures to the surface. Whatever lies beneath the ice, both the Covenant and the transformed network consider it valuable enough to commit their most advanced assets to claiming and controlling it. But the most chilling revelation came from secondary data recovered during the download, communications between Covenant leadership regarding something called the Awakening Protocol. This wasn't just a transformed operation, it was the primary directive embedded in their collective consciousness. The purpose for which they were gathering resources, consolidating control, and establishing global infrastructure networks. The protocol appears to involve activating dormant functions within the Laban strain itself, functions the original creators engineered as fail-safes, but never implemented. The transformed believe these functions will allow them to transcend their current limitations, to evolve beyond the compromised adaptation they represent into something far more powerful. They're building something at the origin site, something designed to broadcast a specific frequency globally, a signal that will trigger the next phase of transformation in all infected individuals, while simultaneously initiating primary conversion in humans with compatible genetic markers. Not just a pandemic, but a forced evolutionary leap affecting significant percentages of the global population simultaneously. The timeline for completion, based on resource allocation and construction patterns, gives us less than 3 weeks to reach the site and prevent activation. We're moving north now, following transportation corridors through increasingly dangerous territory. The transformed hold nearly complete control of regions above the 60th parallel, establishing what they call integration centers, facilities where captured humans are systematically exposed to the Laban strain under controlled conditions to maximize successful transformation rates. Our team has adopted a modified strategy based on what we learned in Toronto. Rather than avoiding transformed patrols, we're selectively engaging smaller groups, using MI's sensitivity to network communications to identify isolated units before they can alert others. The compound synthesized from the Covenant's research data has improved our resistance to network influence, but supplies are limited. We must reach the Arctic within 10 days to maintain effective coverage for our entire team. I'm broadcasting this from an abandoned weather station near Hudson Bay. The transformed activity in this region is unlike anything we've observed elsewhere. Massive movements of both converted humans and specialized biological constructs they've engineered for Arctic conditions. Whatever awaits at the origin site has them mobilizing resources on an unprecedented scale. If you're receiving this, know that the war isn't lost yet. Resistance cells operate in most major urban centers, developing increasingly effective countermeasures against transformed incursion. The Covenant's research, despite its morally reprehensible methods, has yielded insights into potential vulnerabilities in the network's communication structures. Specialized electromagnetic pulses can temporarily disrupt their coordination, creating windows for tactical advantage. More importantly, we've confirmed what my brother theorized. The transformation process as currently expressed represents a corrupted implementation of the original design. The Laban strain was created to enhance humanity, not replace it. Understanding this distinction is crucial to developing effective long-term countermeasures. I don't know when I'll be able to broadcast again. This is Reed Miles broadcasting from the heart of the abyss. 23 days have passed since my last transmission. 23 days of Arctic darkness, blood on ice, and truths more terrifying than the monsters we've been fighting. If this signal reaches you, it means the makeshift transmitter we've assembled from the remains of shattered civilizations still functions. It means there's still something to fight for. We reached the Arctic Circle 12 days after departing Hudson Bay, traveling through transformed, controlled territories using a combination of stealth, deception, and Mai's unique ability to sense network activity. The compound synthesized from Covenant research continued to maintain our partial transformations in a stable state, though each dose lasted shorter than the one before. Our bodies were adapting, building tolerance. Time was working against us on every front. The coordinates led us to an area of recently exposed permafrost 300 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. Satellite imagery had shown unusual thermal patterns, but nothing prepared us for what we found. A massive excavation site sprawled across 5 square kilometers of ice, the snow stained with the rusty hue of specialized biological compounds that transformed use to mark territorial boundaries. Structures of unmistakably non-human design protruded from the ice, curved, organic forms that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, constructed from materials that matched no known element on the periodic table. We observed from concealed positions for 48 hours, documenting transformed activity patterns. They had established a perimeter of sensor arrays designed to detect conventional human approach, heat signatures, heartbeats, respiratory patterns. Our partially transformed biology allowed us to bypass these measures, our vital signs sufficiently altered to register as background noise rather than intruders. The primary excavation focused on a central structure resembling a spire that extended at least 30 meters above the ice and continued an unknown distance below. The transformed had constructed a biological scaffold around it, living tissue engineered to interface directly with the ancient technology. The connection points pulsed with bioluminescence, the rhythm matching the wave patterns I'd observed in transformed network communications. We infiltrated the site during a period of reduced activity, using the sprawling excavation tunnels to access lower levels. The environment grew increasingly alien as we descended. The walls transitioned from ice to a material that seemed both metallic and organic, with circuit-like patterns that glowed with faint internal light when touched. The temperature rose steadily despite our increasing depth, the air carrying unfamiliar scents that triggered responses from the Laban strain in our systems, recognition on a cellular level. At approximately 200 meters below the surface, we encountered the first evidence of the facility's true purpose. A vast chamber opened before us, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor covered with thousands of empty stasis pods identical to the sarcophagi described in the original Project Laban documents. But one wall of the chamber displayed something that changed our understanding entirely. A massive relief carving depicting bipedal figures overseeing what appeared to be a planetary transformation process. The carving showed a world gripped by glacial expansion, then the same world with the ice retreated, populated by evolved beings. Between these scenes were detailed representations of the transformation process, the deliberate engineering of adaptive traits, the controlled distribution of what was unmistakably the Laban strain, and the preservation of transformed individuals in stasis chambers. Not as containment, but as insurance, genetic lifeboats preserved to restart civilization after catastrophic climate change. Walsh discovered an intact control interface, a crystalline structure that responded to physical contact by displaying holographic information in an unknown language. Yet the mathematical symbols were recognizable enough for Patel to decipher their significance. This wasn't just a storage facility. It was a monitoring station designed to track global climate patterns and activate revival protocols when conditions matched pre-programmed parameters. The modern warming of the Arctic hadn't just released a few preserved entities by accident. It had triggered an automated awakening sequence designed to reintroduce adapted humans into an environment recovering from an ice age. The system was functioning exactly as designed, except that it was activating 10,000 years too late in a world already populated by an established human civilization. Deeper in the facility, we found what appeared to be research laboratories. Preserved specimens of early hominids showed evidence of progressive genetic modifications, a deliberate evolutionary acceleration program conducted over thousands of years. The Laban strain wasn't created to transform existing humans. It was the culmination of a multi-generational engineering project to create humans specifically adapted for post-glacial conditions. Lin Shen located a central data repository, a crystalline matrix storing what must have been exabytes of information in molecular structures. When she touched it, something unprecedented occurred. The Laban strain in her system reacted to the matrix, establishing a direct neural interface. Information flooded into her consciousness at rates that would have destroyed an unmodified human mind. She collapsed, blood streaming from her eyes and nose as her brain physically rewired itself to accommodate the data transfer. For 6 minutes and 43 seconds, she convulsed on the chamber floor while we stood helpless, weapons trained on her in case the overwhelming information triggered a complete transformation. When she finally stilled, the person who opened her eyes was both Lin and something more. Her irises had expanded to eliminate the whites entirely, reflecting light with an internal luminescence that didn't match any transform pattern we'd previously encountered. What Lin shared changed everything we thought we knew about the Laban strain and its origins. The creators weren't a separate species that engineered humanity. They were humans themselves, survivors of a previous civilization that reached technological sophistication comparable to our own before facing extinction from rapid climate change. As their world froze, they dedicated their remaining resources to creating a biological legacy that could eventually reclaim the planet. The Laban strain represented their final achievement, a comprehensive genetic modification package that adapted human physiology for survival in extreme conditions while preserving cognitive function and technological knowledge. The hibernation chambers were designed to preserve thousands of transformed individuals who would awaken when the ice retreated, carrying the accumulated knowledge and technology of their civilization. But something interfered with this plan. An unexpected solar event damaged the facility's monitoring systems approximately 13,000 years ago, triggering premature revival of a small number of transformed individuals. These awakened too early, emerging into a still frozen world where their adaptations proved excessive for conditions. Isolated and desperate, their cognitive functions degraded as survival instincts overwhelmed the balanced integration the creators had designed. These early awakened became the predatory entities of human folklore, the original vampires whose encounters with primitive human populations generated the myths that persisted through history. Their damaged biology transmitted corrupted versions of the Laban strain through fluid exchange, creating imperfect transformations that heightened predatory characteristics while minimizing the cognitive and cooperative aspects the creators had prioritized. The facility's automated systems detected this malfunction and initiated containment protocols, deactivating remaining stasis chambers and sealing the complex beneath thickening ice. For millennia, the damaged system remained dormant, neither reviving more transformed individuals nor completely shutting down. The corrupted early awakened and their progeny were hunted to near extinction by human populations, surviving only in isolated regions and folklore. until modern climate change triggered the backup revival protocols. The system, detecting planetary warming and interpreting it as the end of the Ice Age, reactivated precisely as designed. But its central coordination capability remained damaged, leaving individual stasis chambers to awaken their occupants without proper integration into the planned restoration program. The transformed network we've been fighting isn't operating according to the Creator's original directives. It's an emergent system piecing together fragmented imperatives, combining the survival and adaptation programming with incomplete understanding of its purpose. The collective consciousness doesn't represent malicious intent, but rather a biological system desperately trying to fulfill corrupted instructions with insufficient information. And the Awakening Protocol. This represents the network's discovery of the central control system, the very chamber we now stood in. The transformed weren't building something new at the excavation site. They were repairing the damaged coordination system that should have guided their revival and reintegration. Once activated, it would connect all transformed individuals to the original program, not to destroy humanity, but to implement the comprehensive adaptation protocol as originally designed. In the Creator's plan, the Laban strain was meant to be gradually introduced to indigenous populations through controlled exposure, allowing for adaptation rather than traumatic transformation. The network was attempting to reverse engineer this approach, drawing on fragmented genetic memory of the original protocols. As we processed these revelations, the facility's systems responded to Lynn's interface by initiating a full revival sequence. Chambers we hadn't noticed, seamlessly integrated into the chamber walls, began activation cycles. The transformed weren't just excavating the central spire, they were awakening the facility's original occupants, the true custodians created to guide the adaptation process. We had minutes before we would face entities unlike any we'd encountered, fully realized expressions of the Laban strain as originally engineered, with thousands of years of technological knowledge and uncompromised cognitive function. Whether they would recognize us as humans to be adapted or threats to be eliminated remained unknown. Mai's network sensitivity suddenly spiked. She detected massive transformed convergence toward our position, hunting parties activated by the facility's awakening sequence. Our extraction window was closing rapidly. The team split. Walsh and Patel moved to secure our escape route, while Lynn worked to download critical data from the Matrix. That's when I felt the familiar presence, a consciousness I recognized despite never having directly encountered it in this form. My brother, Marcus, not physically present, but connected to the facility's systems through the transformed network. He had fully transformed since our last encounter, surrendering to the network's influence, but something of his original self remained, enough to reach out to me through the tenuous connection established by the Laban strain in my system. His message wasn't in words, but compressed concepts that unfolded in my mind with crystalline clarity. The Covenant hadn't discovered the Arctic facility by accident. They'd been led there by research Marcus had conducted decades earlier, research he'd hidden from the Vigil because he recognized its implications. The corruption in the Laban strain could be repaired. The predatory aspects weren't inherent to its design, but artifacts of damaged implementation. Most critically, Marcus had located the original adaptation protocol, the template for how the Laban strain was meant to transform humanity, not through predatory conversion, but through controlled exposure and guided integration. This protocol remained inactive in a secure partition of the facility's systems, inaccessible to the current transformed network, because it required specific genetic markers to access, markers my brother and I shared. Marcus had infiltrated the transformed hierarchy, maintaining enough independent function to position himself within their leadership structure while concealing his true purpose. He wasn't fighting the transformation. He was redirecting it, working to replace the corrupted awakening protocol with the original adaptation template. But he couldn't complete this process alone. The system required dual authentication, two individuals with the specific genetic markers acting in concert. He needed me to complete the sequence, not to stop the transformed, but to correct them, to restore the Laban strain to its intended function. This revelation hit with physical force. Everything we'd fought against wasn't inherently malevolent, but tragically corrupted. The predatory nature, the hijacking of human consciousness, the forced networking, none of these were features of the original design. They were flaws introduced by premature awakening and damaged systems. The decision before me carried impossible weight. Helping Marcus meant allowing the global transformation to proceed, not stopping it, but redirecting it toward controlled adaptation rather than predatory conversion. As transformed entities breached the outer chambers of the facility, I made my choice. I directed Lynn to locate the protocol partition using information flowing directly from Marcus through our shared connection. Walsh and Patel established defensive positions to buy us time, deploying our remaining UV weapons to create choke points in the approach corridors. The protocol interface resembled nothing in human technology, a crystalline structure that responded to genetic markers rather than physical interaction. When I placed my hand against it, the Laban strain in my system resonated with frequencies embedded in the crystal lattice. Information flowed bidirectionally, the system reading my genetic structure while simultaneously transmitting activation sequences that triggered dormant functions in the strain itself. Pain beyond description coursed through my body as the Laban strain in my system underwent fundamental reconfiguration. This wasn't transformation but restoration, the corrupted implementation being overwritten by the original template. I felt my consciousness expanding, connecting not to the transformed network, but to something older and more integrated. Not a hive mind that subsumed individuality, but a collective awareness that preserved it while enabling perfect coordination. Through this expanded awareness, I sensed Marcus completing the authentication from somewhere in the facility's outer perimeter. The protocol activated, sending a cascading signal through the facility's central spire. This signal would propagate through the transformed network, rewriting the corrupted implementation of the Laban strain worldwide. Not eliminating the transformation, but correcting it, shifting its expression from predatory conversion to guided adaptation. The transformed entities breaching the chamber stopped their advance, their bodies convulsing as the new protocol rewrote their neural patterns. Some collapsed, the sudden shift too extreme for their corrupted biology to integrate. Others stabilized in a new configuration, eyes still reflecting light abnormally, but with expressions of confusion rather than predatory focus. The awakening chambers completed their activation cycle. Their occupants emerged, beings that appeared human in general form, but with subtle adaptations evident in their physiology. They assessed the situation with calm efficiency, communicating in a language that somehow registered as both foreign and familiar to my transformed senses. Lynn's direct connection to the data matrix had given her access to their linguistic patterns. She engaged with them while the rest of us maintained defensive positions, uncertain whether the protocol activation had succeeded completely or what these original custodians would make of our hybrid status, neither fully human nor properly transformed. Their response defied our expectations. They recognized us as evidence of their system's failure, unintended variations resulting from corrupted implementation. Rather than hostility, they exhibited something like scientific concern, immediately beginning diagnostic assessments of the transformed individuals who had survived the protocol shift. Through Lynn's translation, we learned their original mission: to guide humanity's gradual adaptation to a warming planet through controlled introduction of the Laban strain. The accelerated climate change of our era had triggered their revival thousands of years ahead of their projected timeline into a world already populated by a technologically advanced civilization. Their ethical programming remained intact despite millennia in stasis. They recognized the catastrophic impact of the corrupted strain and immediately prioritized mitigation strategies. The signal emanating from the central spire would continue propagating, reaching transformed individuals worldwide and rewriting their corrupted implementation. Those too damaged to integrate the corrections would enter a form of biological shutdown, not death, but suspended animation until individual treatment could be administered. This was neither victory nor defeat for humanity, but the beginning of a complex integration. The Laban strain, properly implemented, offered genuine evolutionary advantages, enhanced physical capabilities, extended lifespan, improved cognitive function, and resilience to environmental stressors. But these benefits were designed to complement human civilization, not replace it. The original custodians numbered only 87 individuals, a fraction of their intended awakening cohort. They possessed technologies beyond current human development, but lacked the numbers to implement their original gradual adaptation plan. They would need to collaborate with existing human power structures to address the crisis their corrupted progeny had created. As the facility stabilized, transformed entities throughout the complex either integrated the corrected protocol or entered suspension. The custodians established communication with other awakening sites globally, coordinating a synchronized implementation of correction protocols. Within hours, the transformed network as we had known it ceased to exist, replaced by a fragmented but rapidly reorganizing awareness operating on the original cooperative principles. My sensitivity to network communications transformed from painful intrusion to structured information flow. She described the difference as hearing harmony instead of screaming, the chaotic, predatory imperatives replaced by organized, purposeful coordination. The protocols weren't eliminating the network, but restoring its intended function as a knowledge-sharing system, rather than a consciousness-subsuming control mechanism. We made contact with resistance outposts worldwide, relaying information about the protocol activation and its effects. Reports confirmed transformed individuals across all territories exhibiting the same pattern: violent cessation of predatory behavior followed by either integration of the corrected strain or biostatic shutdown. The collective threat had been neutralized, though the implications remained profound. I finally reunited with Marcus in the facility's central chamber. His physical transformation was complete, eyes entirely reflective, skin with the translucent quality characteristic of advanced adaptation, movements exhibiting the liquid grace of the fully transformed. But his consciousness remained intact, his personality preserved within the expanded awareness the corrected strain provided. He explained his deception, the necessity of infiltrating the transformed hierarchy to position himself for accessing the correction protocols. The corrupted network had been too powerful to fight directly. It required subversion from within. His apparent surrender to transformation had been strategic, a calculated risk to preserve enough of humanity to implement a permanent solution. The vial he had left me years ago contained not just a compound to slow transformation, but markers that would prepare my system for eventually implementing the correction protocol. He had been guiding my journey from the beginning, using the transformed network itself as his mechanism for steering me toward the Arctic facility. Every step, even my initial infection, had been part of a strategy decades in the making. The custodians have established a cooperative framework with remaining human governments. The adaptation process will proceed under controlled conditions, with individuals having choices about participation rather than forced conversion. The corrupted strain has been neutralized worldwide, with specialized treatment centers established to address those in suspended animation. I remain in the Arctic facility, working directly with the custodians to develop communication protocols for explaining these events to a world traumatized by what it perceived as monstrous predation. My unique status, human consciousness with partial transformation corrected by the original protocol, makes me an ideal intermediary between unmodified humans and the fully adapted. The future remains uncertain. The Laban strain represents a genuine evolutionary fork for humanity, a biological adaptation engineered to address climate challenges we now face from different causes than the creators anticipated. Its proper implementation offers solutions to pressing human limitations, but its history of corrupted expression has understandably generated fear and resistance. I continue these broadcasts as a bridge between worlds, explaining the transformed to the human and the human to the transformed. The red sky hasn't disappeared, but it's changing hue from blood crimson to the softer tones of dawn. Not an ending, but a transition. Not a replacement, but an adaptation. This is Reed Miles, balance between human and other, working to ensure both survive what comes next. The transformation continues, but on our terms, with our humanity intact. The darkness hasn't lifted entirely, but we can see the horizon now, and something new awaits us there. This is Reed Miles broadcasting from Adaptation Center 7, formerly known as Geneva. 36 days have passed since the activation of the correction protocol. 36 days of upheaval as humanity confronts a truth more complex than the simple narrative of invasion and resistance we had constructed. The world has fractured along new fault lines, not just between human and transformed, but between those who accept adaptation as evolution and those who view any change as corruption. I continue these broadcasts not as propaganda for either side, but as testimony to the painful birth of a new paradigm. The immediate aftermath of the protocol activation was chaos on a global scale. The transformed network's sudden shift from predatory aggression to confused integration created a power vacuum in regions they had controlled. Transformed individuals who successfully integrated the correction protocol retained their enhanced capabilities, but lost the collective drive that had united them. Those too corrupted for integration entered biostatic suspension, a form of hibernation that preserved them for potential treatment, but rendered them effectively comatose. I departed the Arctic facility with a delegation of original custodians, traveling south to establish contact with major population centers and explain what had occurred. Our reception varied dramatically by region. Nations that had suffered the highest transformation rates welcomed the protocol activation as liberation. Those that had maintained stronger human enclaves viewed the custodians with suspicion, seeing their arrival not as salvation, but as a more sophisticated invasion strategy. The first major resistance emerged in what remained of the European Union's unified military command. General Heinrich Voss, who had coordinated defense operations against transformed incursions across continental Europe, refused to accept the custodian's explanation. He viewed the correction protocol not as restoration, but as a more insidious form of conversion, a means of pacifying human resistance through false promises of cooperation. Under his command, European forces established a defensive perimeter around population centers, employing advanced UV barrier systems to prevent any transformed individuals, corrected or otherwise, from entering. I attempted diplomatic engagement through established channels, broadcasting detailed explanations of the Laban strain's true nature and the safeguards built into the correction protocol. General Voss responded by jamming our transmissions and declaring all partially transformed individuals, including myself, as compromised assets subject to containment. His position garnered significant support among populations traumatized by months of transformed predation. The narrative that any transformation represented corruption rather than adaptation proved powerfully persuasive to those who had lost loved ones. The first direct conflict came at the Lyon containment zone. A group of corrected, transformed individuals approached the perimeter under white flag, seeking to reunite with human family members within the protected zone. General Voss's forces responded with a barrage of UV weaponry followed by conventional firearms. 27 corrected transformed died in the initial volley, not from the UV exposure, which the corrected strain could tolerate at higher levels than the corrupted version, but from the bullets that followed. This massacre triggered a cascade of escalating confrontations across European borders. Corrected, transformed individuals, many still adjusting to their new cognitive state without network direction, responded with uncoordinated defensive actions. Their enhanced physical capabilities made even improvised resistance lethal to conventional forces. Within 3 days, pitched battles erupted along the perimeter of every major containment zone. The custodians attempted intervention, deploying advanced technology to establish neutral zones where dialogue could occur without risk to either side. Their efforts met limited success. Too many humans viewed them as the architects of invasion rather than its solution. Too many corrected, transformed, retained emotional trauma from their period under corrupted network control, harboring resentment toward humans who now rejected their returned awareness. Meanwhile, a different dynamic emerged in North America. Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, who had led resistance efforts from a fortified research complex in Colorado, approached the situation with scientific pragmatism rather than military defensiveness. She established controlled contact protocols that allowed verified, corrected, transformed to undergo extensive monitoring before limited reintegration. This measured approach provided crucial data demonstrating that the correction was genuine and stable. The protocol had truly restored individual autonomy while maintaining enhanced capabilities. Something is awakening in the deeper facility levels, something even the original custodians approach with caution. The red sky has turned to dawn, but the horizon still holds mysteries we've only begun to comprehend. Humanity stands at evolutionary crossroads, adapting not through blind natural selection, but conscious technological intervention. Whether this represents transcendence or hubris remains for history to determine. This is Reed Miles, transformed but still human, broadcasting from the border between worlds. The resistance continues, not against adaptation itself, but against extremes that would sacrifice our essential nature, whether human stubbornness or transformed transcendence. The middle path remains narrowest but most promising. The Red Sky Protocol has transformed from threat to promise, not ending humanity but advancing it. Whether we recognize ourselves after this metamorphosis completes remains the question that drives both fear and hope in equal measure. This is Reed Miles, signing off until the next development in our ongoing adaptation.